Hey everyone, welcome back to your channel. And today I'm going to discuss a new movie, and the movie name is Transporter 3, and this movie made in 2008. So today I'm going to review this movie, and I hope you are loving this. So let's start the review of this movie Transporter 3. Okay, so uh, Transporter 3 details scene by scene summary, and let's start the opening sequence, the toxic cargo. Okay, the film opens on the deck of a cargo ship at sea, and two crewmen sneak inside a container. They think holds alcohol, and instead it contains toxic waste drums. They open one and are killed instantly by the poisonous fumes, and the alarms goes off and their bodies are thrown overboard. Okay, Frank's ordinary life and the setup. Frank Martin Jason Statham is fishing up the coast of Marshall with his friends Inspector Turkany. It's a quite uneventful day. Meanwhile, a small-time driver is at a police checkpoint in his car with a woman asleep in the back. When the police went to inspect, he speeds off, chased by French cops, and the crash into Frank's house. Later that night, Malcolm crashes his car violently inside Frank's living room, bleeding and dying. Frank sees the woman in the back seat, Valentina Natalya Rudakova. Before he can help, he notices metal bracelets on both their wrists. Frank's outside after the ambulance, and arrives, but the ambulance explodes, killing Malcolm. Frank is knocked unconscious and kidnapped. Forced into the job, Frank walks up in a room wearing only his underwear and the explosive bracelet on his wrist, and the villain, Jonas Johnson's Robert Nipper, enters and forces Frank at gunpoint to accept a job, otherwise he will be killed on the spot. And Johnson explains that if Frank strays more than 75 feet from his car, the bomb will detonate. Frank reluctantly agrees. Johnson reveals Frank's back body, yet stripped of all weapons and fitted with or tracking GPS in the backseat, is Valentina. Frank says he works alone, but after Johnson's theaters threatens Valentina, he is forced to take her too. And the first leg, Marseille to Budapest. Frank sets out following the GPS directions, and his first destination is Budapest. Valentina refuses to talk at first and only glaring at Frank. And Frank tries to call him friend Otto, a mechanic, to remove the bomb, and Otto can't disarm it. And the bomb's transmitter is inside the car, and Johnson man arrives and try to force Frank back onto the road, and Frank defeats them in a brutal fight, even losing his shirt at one point as he brawls through Otto's garage. Okay, reaching Budapest, they reach Budapest, but Jonathan phones to tell Frank he's fired. Anyone could do this job. One of Jonathan's men mm, steals Frank's Audi with Valentina inside, and Frank chases them on a bicycle through an industrial area and jumps through a window, recovers the car and Valentina and escapes. And road to Bucharest, guys in the black Mercedes. Frank's next destination becomes Bucharest. However, they are soon chased by a black Mercedes E-Class driven by agents working for Valentina's father and the Ukrainian environmental ministers, whom Johnson is blackmailing. Frank maneuvers the Audi sideways between two big trucks. Two big trucks and sends the pursuing Mercedes off a cliff. Valentina opens up while stopped. Valentina reveals she is Valentina Vashilev, daughter of the Ukrainian minister. She recounts being drugged at a nightclub and kidnapped so that Johnsons could use her as a leverage to force her father to sign a toxic waste contract. Valentina's candid personality emerges. She teases Frank, and eventually they share a kiss, hinting at growing mutual attraction, and embarks on the bridge. The next GPS coordinates lead them back towards Odisha, where Jonas's men ambush them on a bridge, and Valentina is seized, her bracelets removed, and Johnson orders Frank's car shot at from both sides, and Frank drives the Audi off the bridge into the water and Johnson leaves him to drown, and assuming he's dead. Underwater escape. Underwater, Frank uses air from the car's tires to fill plastic bags and creating air pockets that allow him to breathe and eventually float both himself and the Audi to the surface. And Turkey and Ukrainian police arrive just in time to hold Frank and the car out of the water. Car out of the water. Okay, and train chase finale, Valentina is now aboard a train with Johnson, who gives her father a deadline to sign the contract. Frank Zodi is repaired and he races towards the train, then drives off a bridge uh, and lands on the top of it. A signature stunt moment. Frank fires Johnson's man inside the train cars, killing, and then with martial arts and weapons. Frank confronts Johnson's but can't reach him because he's too far from the OD. And the final bit, Johnson's and Johnson detaches the train cars and separating himself and Valentina from Frank, and Frank leaps his body into the next car, fight Johnson hand to hand, knocks him out, and takes his key. Frank straps the explosive bracelet onto Johnson's wrist. That was the wrist, and that is the knee. Drive the car backward beyond 75 feet, and the bomb detonates, killing Johnson. Apologize. Valentina is reunited with her father. Frank calls Tarakani and the report her safe, and the corrupt toxic waste deal is cancelled. In the final scene, Frank and Tarakani are back on their boat, fishing peacefully with Valentina and sunbathing. Suggesting she is now part of the circle. Okay, and themes and notes. The film follows a classic forced mission with a bomb. Attached a trio similar to Speed, and Frank must stay close to his car or die. Along the way, the stiff professionalism of Frank's classes with Valentina's wild spirit, creating both conflict and eventual chemistry. Underneath the relentless action is a subplot about corporate corruption and environmental harm, used as a leverage device for the kidnapping. Okay, and if you want, I can also break the summary down into chapters with an estimated time stamps and major action highlights, or provide a character list and relationship for clarity. Okay, so just wait. So now here is a deeper expanded breakdown of Transporter 3, divided into story chapters with detailed actions, beats, characters, motivations, and emotional shifts. Okay, So you are ready to listen this. So the chapter 1 is the deadly contract, opening 15 minutes. The film opens on a cargo ship transporting toxic waste. Two workers accidentally open a container and die from poisonous fumes. This immediately sets the theme and corporate greed, environmental corruption, disposable human lives, and meanwhile in Marcelli, Frank Martin is enjoying a cute life and he is fishing with his friends Inspector Tarkani, hinting that Frank's trying to live peacefully after the chaos of the previous films, and but peace never lasts for Frank. And the chapter 2 is the crash and the trap, 15 to 13 minutes. Okay. A wounded driver crashes into Frank's house, and in the back seat is a mysterious woman. Both are wearing explosive bracelets. The driver dies, and the ambulance explodes. Frank is kidnapped, and he walks up face to face with the villain. And Jonas Johnson, a calm, cold corporate evil in a suit, and Johnson forces Frank into a new job. Deliver the girl. Follow GPS instructions. Never go more than 75 feet from the car, or the bracelet explodes. And this chapter stabilizes. Frank is trapped, and the car is now this prison. The package is human. Chapter 3 is Frank meets Valentina, 13 to 50 minutes. The woman is revealed to be Valentina Vasilov, a daughter of a Ukrainian environmental minister. At first, she is rebellious, drunk, angry, refuses to cooperate. Frank is rigid and emotionless. The dynamic, discipline versus chaos, control versus freedom, and professional versus wild. And the tension drives the middle of the film. Chapter 4 is attempted escapes and brutal garage fight, 15 to 65 minutes. Okay. Frank tries to remove the bracelet with a mechanic. It fails. Johnson's men attack. Frank fights shirtless using tools, car parts, pure martial skills, and this fight shows Frank is still alive and he refuses to be powerless, but the bracelet keeps him psychologically trapped. Even when he wins, he has not escaped. And the chapter 5 Budapest chase bicycle sequences, 65 to 80 minutes. And Johnson tries to replace Frank with another driver, and Frank refuses. A spectacular sequences follows, and Wood is stolen. Frank chases on bicycle, leaps through window, and reclaims the air mid-jaws. And this is one of the most physically demanding stunt scene in the film, and psychologically, Frank chooses responsibility for Valentina, not just survival. And the emotional shift 18 to 95 minutes. During the road trip, Valentina opens up. She explains she was drugged and kidnapped, used the blackmail her father into signing a toxic waste deal. This is where the film softens. Valentina challenges Frank. Why are you so cold? Why no emotions? Why are you afraid of? Eventually, attractions builds. They share intimacy, not just physical but emotional. Frank, who lives by strict rules and begins breaking them. Okay, and now let's read the chapter 7. Breeze, amuse, and underwater survival 95 to 110 minutes. Johnson double crosses Frank and man abuses him on a bridge. Valentina is taken Frank's car in ridelet with bullets. He drives up the bridge into water and underwater sequence. Uses tire air to create flotations and escapes drowning. Survives again symbolically. Frank is reborn and he is longer just delivering cargo. Now he is rescuing someone he cares about. Chapter 8 Train Finale 110 to 125 minutes. Johnson puts Valentina on a train and pressuring her father to sign the deal, and Frank repairs the Audi, launches it onto the moving train, and fights through carriages and takes down armed guards, and he cannot reach Johnson at first because the bracelet limits distance and final move. Frank puts the explosive bracelets onto Johnson's wrist and then he drives away. Johnson explodes. Corporate grade literally self destructs. And the chapter 9 apologizes of final 5 minutes. Valentina reunites with her father. The toxic waste deal is cancelled, and the Frank returns to fishing with Tarkani. But now Valentina is sunbathing on the boat, and Frank is still the transporter, but maybe slightly less alone. And psychological breakdown. Frank Martin controls obsessed, emotionally repressed, lives by rules to avoid chaos, and falls for someone who represents chaos. In this film, Frank's growth is subtle. He chooses connections over isolation. Valentina appears reckless, actually traumatized, uses rebellions to cope, forces Frank to feel. She is the emotional catalyst of the films, and the Johnsons represents corporate exploitations called strategist. No personal emotions is people as leverage, and his death is poetic justice. And what makes Transporter 3 different compared to the Transporter 2? This one focuses more on romance, emotional vulnerability, and psychological conflict. Bracelet real. And the car is not just a vehicle, it's taking bomb case. And if you want next, I can break down Frank's full psychological profile and the deeper meaning of the bracelet symbolism, ranking all transport action sequences, and or why this film is more emotional than the first two. Okay, just wait for a couple of seconds, and I'm just drinking a water, so just wait a few of seconds, less than 1 minute. Okay, I'm just drinking water with bottle, with steel bottle. So now I'm going to explain you Frank Martin full psychological profile. Okay. Wait for a couple of seconds. Less than 30 seconds. Now less than 10 seconds. And now I'm ready. I'm ready to explain you Frank Martin's psychological profile. Okay. Let's go deep. Personality structure, trauma patterns, and emotional defense, and what truly drives him, and core identity structure. Let's start with core identity structure. Uh, Surface identity: elite professionals, drivers, and military level combat skill. Lives by strict rules and emotionally controlled and minimalist lifestyle. And psychological core: Frank is not just disciplined, he is hyper control, and control is not preference, control is survival. His famous rules are never change the deal, no names, no emotional involvement, and our psychological armor. Without structure, he feels vulnerable. Possible background psychology stuff not deeply explored in the film and suggest and the former military or black ops background. Exposures to high stress environments likely witness betrayal or loss. Learn that emotional attachment creates weakness. He shows traits consistent with hypervigilance, emotional suppressions, and compartmentalization. High tolerance for violence, avoidant attachment style, and Frank does not lack emotions and he locks it away. Attachment style, dismissive, avoidant. Frank in Frank avoids intimacy because intimacy. It threatens his controls. It creates unpredictability. It introduces emotional risks, and he prefers transactional interactions, clear boundaries, isolations, and in transport three, the bracelet becomes symbolic, and he is psychologically forced to stay close to someone. And this mirrors emotional closeness, which is he usually escapes. And now let's talk about one trauma indicator. Just wait for a few seconds. I'm coming in few seconds. Okay, just wait. I'm not giving you less than 1 minute. So can I get written? Yes. Just wait for. I'm just searching something. Wait. Wait for a couple of seconds, and that's why this movie is great. That's why how I love this movie, and everyone wants to see. And mm, so if you don't watch this movie, then go to the theaters. Go into the. You can watch this in your PC, your tablet, and your mobile phones, and suggest this to your friends. They don't forget to watch this masterpiece. And the trauma indicators, while now explicitly diagnosed, Frank shows several PTSD adjacent traits and bilateral effect, minimal emotional expressions, calm under extreme violence, and comfort in combat over comfort in relationships, and difficulty expressing vulnerability. He thrives in chaos and but struggles in emotional stillness. That's important. Relationship with Valentina, psychological disruptions, and Valentina visually represents everything Frank avoids and emotionally expressive, chaotic, impulsive, sensual, vulnerable, and she forces him to respond emotionally, protect beyond a contract, and breaks his own rules. Okay, and admit attraction. The bracelet symbolizes forced proximity, but the emotional bond becomes a voluntary. That's growth. His relationship with violence, and Frank is extremely efficient with violence. But notice he don't enjoy killing. He kills only when necessary. He shows no sadism. He avoids collateral damage, and this suggests he sees violence as a tool, not identity. And that's crucial dis- distinctions between him and villain. Emotional turning point in Transporter 3, and the real shift happens after Bridge abuses and he thinks Valentina might die, and for the first time his mission becomes personal. He is no longer completing a contract, he is saving someone, and that is a psychological transformations, control versus connection, and the central conflict. Frank's internal struggle. I am safest alone, and but the film asks, what if isolation is not strength but fear? Valentina cracks his emotional armor and he remains controlled, but slightly more human by the end. Does Frank heal? Not fully, but in the final scene, he allows Valentina on the boat and he doesn't push her away. And the small act is massive growth for someone avoidant. He moves from the isolation, conditional connections, and clinical styles breakdown. If we categorized him psychologically, high functioning trauma survivors, avoidant attachment, emotionally restricted, identity built around competence, values emotionally above intimacy. Okay, but importantly, he is not broken, he is defended. And the final psychological summary, Frank Martin, a man who trusts systems more than people, a soldier who feels safest in motion, a protector who fears being protected, a loner who secretly wants connections but only with someone strong enough to survive his world. And if you want to next, I can analyze the bracelet as psychological metaphor and why Valentina is the perfect psychological opposite. Whether Frank could realistically maintain a long term relationships, or compare him to other action heroes like John Wick. Your move. So now I am going to explain you about the bracelet as psychological metaphor from Transporter 3. On the surface, the bracelet is just a float device, a bomb that explodes, and if Frank moves more than 75 feet from his car, but psychologically it represents something uh, much deeper and much deeper. And everyone loves this movie. You can see the review of this movie. Most of the review is in a good way. That's how everyone loves this. And if you want to see this, you can see. And you can see the movie. This movie is give us two messages. Gives us 100 of messages, but in two ways. The first way is in good way, and the second one is a bad way. If you want, you can accept which one you want, and if I'm going to tell you, please collect the good messages from this movie. And okay, and I hope you are loving this. And if you are loving this, then like our video. Okay, then like our video and subscribe our channel, and just wait. Now let's talk about on the surface, the bracelet is just a plot device, a bomb that explodes if Frank moves more than 75 feet from his car. Now let's talk on physical control is equal to emotional control. Frank's entire identity is built around freedom of movement, self-control, precision, autonomy. The bracelet removes all of that, and he is no longer free. He is monitored, he is restricted, and this mirrors emotional attachment, emotional closeness also means you cannot simply walk away. Your actions, your actions affect someone else. You are bound to another portions, and the bracelet forces what Frank avoids approximately and dependence. Okay, and so just wait for a couple of seconds, and let's read something from here. And I'm just changing this. And now let's talk about on the car as a safe zone. Okay, the car as a safe zone. Frank's car has always been his controlled environment, his comfort space, his system. And in earlier films like The Transporter, the car is power. In this film, it becomes a prison psychology. His comfort system becomes confinement, and this suggests the raised emotional walls to he builds to just wait, built to feel safe, are now limiting him. The 75-foot rule is equal to fear of emotional distance. The bracelet explodes if he moves too far away. Symbolically, Frank can't emotionally distance himself anymore, and in past films, if attachments grew, he could detach. Uh, how if he lives and he dies? This is metaphorical intimacy pressure. Shared imprisonments with Valentina, and both Frank and Valentina usually wear bracelets, and this is crucial. They are bound territory and controlled by an external force and forced into shared survival. And these mirrors how trauma bonds can form. Two people trapped in dangers develop emotional closeness, and their relationships grows not from romance alone, but from shared captivity. And when the bracelet becomes secondary, midway through the film, something shifts, and Frank stops thinking about how do I survive and starts thinking how do I save her. At the moment, the bracelet stops being central, and the emotional bonds become stronger than the physical threat. That symbolic growth final reversals, giving the bracelet to Johnson. At the end, Frank straps the bracelets onto Jonas Johnson's, and this is psychology powerful, and it transfers control back to the villain, imprisonments to the manipulator, fear to the one who created it, and its symbolic liberations. Frank reclaims autonomy and deeper psychological meaning. The bracelet represents external control, emotional vulnerability, and the cost of attachment, fear of closeness. Living under constant threat, but the films ultimately suggest connection is worth the risk. Frank survives not by isolating but by allowing connection. Final interpretations. The bracelet is not just a bomb, it is Frank's fear of intimacy made visible. At first, it limits him, by the end, it no longer defines him, and because the chooses connections voluntarily, voluntarily, not because he is forced. And if you want, next we can explore whether Frank's as Valentina would realistically last long term, and compare Frank's to John Wick's psychologically, and how each transporter film represents a different stage of Frank's emotional development. So, just wait. Now I'm going to explain you how each transporter film represents a different stage of Frank Martin's emotional development. Well, trace Frank's psychological evolution across the transporter 2, and the 3. This is not just an action trilogy, it's a subtle emotional arc. And the transfer 2002, the detached professionals. Ah, psychological staged rigid isolations. Frank is the first film in almost mechanical, lives by strict rules and no emotional involvement, no questions, no personal attachments, and when he opens the package, he breaks his own rule, and that moment is critical. It shows curiosity, humanity breaking through disciplines, and but even then, still tries to maintain emotional distance, emotional status, emotionally guarded, beginning to feel still in control. This is Frank at his most pure professional states, and the Transporter to 2005, the protector instinct, psychological state, amazing attachments, and now Frank is working as a driver bodyguard for a child, and the child becomes symbolic of innocence, and Frank shows patience, subtle warmth, protective instinct. When the child is kidnapped, Frank's motivation shifts from contract to personal rescue, and this is important. He is no longer just following rules, and it chooses emotional investment, emotional status, and less rigid, more morally driven, and protected identity emerging. And Frank starts transitioning from mercenary guardian. Okay, and the transporter 2008 forced vulnerability. Psychological stage confronting intimacy, and this film is different. The, the threat is not just external violence, it's emotional proximity with Valentina Vigilde. Frank cannot remain detached. She teases him, challenges him, emotional walls, and forces conversations, forces closeness, and the bracelet psychologically prevents escapes, and this film attacks his defense isolations by the end, and Frank chooses connections, vulnerability. That's the biggest shifts in the trilogy. Emotional status, vulnerable, emotionally open, lightly capable of romantic attachment, and full emotional evolution charge. Why do you don't want to read it? What changes and what doesn't? What says constant discipline and competence, precision, tactical intelligence. What changes emotional availability, willingness to connect, and ability to break his own rules. Deeper psychological insights. Frank evolution mirrors trauma recovery stages and isolation, self protections, controlled connection, safe attachment like a child, and risking romantic intimacy, true vulnerability. The trilogy severely moves him from people are liabilities to connection is survival. Final psychological conclusion, and Frank Martin's arc across the trilogy is not loud or dramatic, it's subtle, but it's there, and he begins as a man who trusts only rules, and he ends as a man who still values rules but allows space for people. That's growth. And if you want next, we can explore would Frank that Valentina realistically survives as a couple and compare Franks to John Wick or Rambo psychologically, and why Transporter 3 feels more emotional than the first two. and or analyzes whether Frank actually has suppressed PTSD. Now I'm going to explain you. Would Frank and Valentina realistically survive as a long-term couple? Let's analyze this realistically, not romantically. Personality compatibility. Frank Martin emotionally restrained, hyper-disciplined, and routine-oriented, avoidant attachment style. Needs control and needs control. Valentina Vasilyev are emotionally expressive, impulsive, thrill-seeking, likely enthusiastic, preoccupied attachment, crave intimacy and connection. Attraction, absolutely. Long-term stability and long-term stability and just complicated. They are psychological opposites and which creates a chemistry but also friction. And the second one is why they are strong in the short term. They bond under shared trauma, life-threatening danger, forced proximity, emotional vulnerability during crisis. This creates what psychologists call a situational bonding. Danger amplifies emotion in high stress situation and and feeling intensity, attraction feels attraction feels deeper and connection feels fated. Connection feels fated. But once safety returns, intensity drops. That's where many trauma couples struggle. The core conflict Frank needs a calm structure and emotional predictability. Valentina thrives on stimulation. Where I was, I'm just forget. Mm. Attention and emotional expressiveness. If she pushes him emotionally, he may withdraw. If he withdraws, she may escalate. That's a classic anxious avoidance cycle. And what need to happen for them to last? Uh, for these relationships to survive long term, Frank would need to communicate feelings more openly, tolerate emotional unpredictability, and not retreat when overwhelmed. Valentina would need to respect his need for space, reduce emotional impulsivity, and build stability beyond thrill. If both measure a strong couple, if not volatile, realistic outcome prediction, most likely scenario, they have intense romance, passionate phase, some conflicts, a period of distance, and Frank may struggle with sustained intimacy. Valentina may struggle with his emotional minimalism without shared purpose, and their differences becomes more visible. Okay, and the key question: does Frank want a normal life? If yes, she fits. If he continues dangerous work, Valentina may either adapt and grow stronger or go resentful to content risk. Final realistic probability, short term 1 to 2 years, very likely. Long term 5 plus years. 50 out of 50 depends on emotional growth, and The relationship would survive only if they evolve beyond trauma. Beyond trauma, bonding into stable partnership. Okay, and symbolic ending meaning the final board scene suggests a possibility, not certainty, and the film ends on potentials, not guarantee. That's actually psychologically realistic. And if you want next, we can explore compare Franks and Valentina to John Wick and Helen. Does Frank show signs to suppress PTSD? And would Valentina eventually feels emotionally neglected? And what kind of movement would be Frank's most stable long-term match? Just wait for a couple of seconds and so what kind of woman would be Frank Martin's most stable long-term match? From Transporter 3, let's analyze this realistically based on Frank's psychology, not fantasy. First, who Frank reality is. Frank Martin is highly disciplined, emotionally restrained, and hyper independent, risk oriented, controlled, focused, and avoidant attachment style, and he does not need someone to fix it. He doesn't need to someone to fix him. He needs someone who does not destabilizes him. And and what would not work long term? Let's talk about on it. Someone like Valentina's Vasilev creates passion but also volatility, traits that would clash long term and highly dramatic, constant emotional validation seeking, impulsive decision making, and so jealousy driven behavior and high emotional unpredictability, and Frank shuts down under emotional chaos, The ideal psychological match for Frank: emotionally secure woman and secure attachment style, comfortable with intimacy, comfortable with independence, doesn't panic when he needs space, doesn't chase or withdraw dramatically, and this neutralizes his avoidant tendencies, calm but strong, and calm but strong. Where I was, just wait for a second. And Frank respect strength, not loud strength, controlled strength. She would likely be professionally uh, content, physically capable, and mentally composed, not easily intimidated. Someone who can handle dangers calmly. And low drama, high loyalty of Frank values loyalty over romance. Theatrics, he would thrive with someone who doesn't trust him emotionally and doesn't play power games and doesn't demand constant reassurance and show quiet consistency. Independent identity, she must have her own life, and if she depends entirely on Frank, he will feel trapped, and if she has her own missions, career, purpose, he respects that and what archetype fits best. Not the chaotic rebel, not the damsel in distress, and more like a former intelligence officer, a security specialist, a disciplined doctor, or crisis responder, someone used to high stress environments and emotionally steady, not emotionally explosive. Okay, and not emotionally explosive. And why this works psychologically? Avoidant avoidant personalities thrive with secure partners, and just wait for a couple of seconds. And don't chase, don't withdraw, don't escalate, and slowly teach safety. Frank would open gradually, not through pressure but through consistency. Would he ever be fully emotionally open? Probably not fully. But with the right partner, he would show Love through protections, reliability, and physical presence, and quiet acts of service, and not dramatic speeches. And the final psychological conclusion: Frank's most stable long term partner would be calm, self contained, and emotionally secure, loyal, competent, and comfortable with silence. And less fireworks, more foundations. If you want, next we can explore the compare Frank's to John Wick psychologically, and does Frank actually shows PTSD symptoms, and what would happen if Frank tries a completely normal domestic life, and why action heroes often struggle with intimacy. Frank Martin versus John Wick psychological comparison. Frank Martin from Transporter 3, John Wick from John Wick. Both are allied combat professionals. Both are emotionally reserved, and but psychologically they are very different men. Core identity of Frank Martin. Identity built on role, self controls defines him. Professionalism is armor, avoids emotional entanglement. Frank says, I survive by structure. And John Wick identity builds on love and loss. And his emotional core defines him. Violence is grief driven. Attachment defines him. And Vic says, I kill because I loved. On relationships with emotion, Frank suppresses feelings and opens slowly. Emotional expressions is minimal, and intimacy makes him uncomfortable. Vic emotionally intense, deeply bonded to his wife. Grief is visible and deeply bonded. So it's stated already. Love is his entire motivations, and Frank fears attachment. Vic is destroyed by attachment, and relationships with violence. Frank violence is tactical, efficient, controlled, and used only when necessary. No emotional raise. Vic violence is emotional and fueled by grief and anger, and sometimes excessive. Personal. Frank fights to complete the missions, and Vic fights because he is in pain. Attachment style: Frank avoidant and Vic deeply attached, secure, shattered by boss. And settled by loss, and Frank keeps people at distance to avoid pain. Vic allowed deep attachment, and losing it and psychologically unravels him. Trauma response: Frank high functioning trauma survivors and emotional compare compartmentalizations and hyper controlled nervous systems, and rarely loses composure. And with complicated grief, lays expression, self destructive streak, moves toward dangers intentionally, and Frank avoids chaos when possible, and Vic walks into it willingly. Romantic capacity of Frank's slow emotional build and fear of vulnerability need secure, calm partner Vic and all or nothing love. Deep devotions. Identity fused with partner struggles after loss and Frank can love are curiously Vic loves completely who is psychologically healthier. And surprisingly, Frank is more emotionally regulated and Vic is more emotionally authentic. Frank survives battle long term and Vic feels deeper but suffers more. And symbolic difference. Frank represents control over emotions and Vic represents overpowering control. Frank is stability, Vic is tragedy. One psychological suggestion. Frank Martin, a man who built walls to survive, and John Wick, a man whose walls collapsed after love, and both are lethal, and but only one is driven by grief. And if one next we can explore, does Frank actually show PTSD symptoms? John Wick psychologically self-destructive and who would win emotionally in a long-term stability comparison. And here you can see my biceps. I'm just trying to do a exercise. I'm just a beginner. I'm not a pro in this. I'm just started. Let's see how it goes. And which man is more capable of healthy love? So let's start to talk about on this. Which man is more capable of healthy love? Comparing Frank Martin and John Wick from Transporter 3 and John Wick. This is a deep psychological question. Healthy love is not about intensity. It's about stability, communications, regulations, and resilience. Let's break it down. Emotional regulations of Frank. Calm under stress. Rarely overwhelmed and controls impulses, avoids emotional extremes. Frank had strong emotional regulations even if he suppresses. Vic. Deep emotional intensity, grief consumes him and anger drives him. Operates from loss. Vic feels deeply but regulation collapses after trauma. Advantage Frank. Healthy love requires emotional stability. Depth of attachment weak. Vic. Before his I think in these works, I will going with Frank. Frank Frank is better in this situation. Now let's depth of attachment. First one is emotional, and last second one is depth of attachment. Vic, before his wife's death, he clearly had deep devotion, strong bonding capacity, and emotional openness. He can love fully, but after loss, he becomes psychologically destabilized. Frank, slower to bond, and fearful of vulnerability and protective but reserved. Frank loves courteously and Vic loves completely. Advantage Vic in emotional depth. Yes. So risk of emotional collapses. Healthy love includes surviving hardship if tragedy happens. Vic spirals into violence and isolation. Frank internalizes pain but continues functioning, and Frank is less likely to collapse psychologically. Advantage goes to Frank. And attachment style, Frank avoidant, Vic secure before trauma, potentially anxious after loss, and avoidant individuals struggle with closeness and but they can learn. Vic attaches deeply but becomes self-destructive when attachment is broken. Long-term stability favors emotional resilience. Advantage slightly Frank. Okay, and long-term relationships potential. Frank in our stable relationships, quite loyalty, reliability, and acts of service, emotional growth possible. Weak in our stable relationships and deep devotions and passionate love or emotional vulnerability. But if loss happens again, weak psychological system is fragile. Final verdict, who is more capable of healthy love? If we measure by emotional intensity, on weak, emotional stability, and long-term sustainability, Frank Martin. So the answer is Frank is more capable of maintaining healthy love, and Vic is more capable of uh, profound love. One is steady, one is tragic. And final psychological insight, Frank protects himself from love. Vic is defined by love, and healthy love requires both depth and regulations. Frank has regulations, Vic has depth, and the healthiest partner overall. Frank, if he chooses to grow emotionally, and if you want next, we can explore. Does Frank secretly shows PTSD systems? And is John Wick addicted to violence? Who's mentally stronger overall? Could Frank survive losing a partner like Vic did? So now I'm going to explain you who is mentally stronger overall. Frank Martin versus John Wick from Transporter 3. John Wick, let's define mental strength properly first. And mental strength includes emotional regulations, resilience under trauma, and self control, ability to adapt, capacity to endure loss without psychological collapse. Now we compare emotional control. Extremely regulated, rarely loses temper and makes decisions logically, keeps emotions contained and even under threat. A bracelet bomb betrayal, he stays focused, weak, controlled in combat, and but emotionally driven by grief and rage is a motivating force. Vic is disciplined, but grief overrides him and advantage Frank. Response to trauma, Vic, and after losing his wife, returns to Warden Underworld and lives in grief. Accepts self-destruction. His strength is endurance, not healing. Frank. Tough, his past trauma is not detailed and he functions normally, maintains routine, and does not spiral. Frank compartmentalizes pain effectively, advantage Frank functional resilience and identity stability. Frank's identity, I am disciplined, I follow rules, and Rick's identity, I was a husband, now I am what I was, and Rick's sense of self collapses when love is gone. Frank's identity does not depend on anyone else's advantage. Frank's tolerance for emotional pain. Here is where it shifts. Vic tolerates enormous sufferings and physical injury and emotional devastations, social isolation, and he keeps going. Uh, Frank avoids deep attachment, possibly to avoid that level of pain, and which has endured deeper emotional collapses, advantage, weak endurance capacity, and self-destruction's risk. Vic re-enters a deadly world knowingly, accepts near suicidal missions, and sometimes acts for vigilance. Frank avoids unnecessary chaos, prefers survivals, and acts strategically. Mental strength includes avoiding self-destructions and advantage Frank. Final comparison threat and the emotional regulations, trauma stability, pain endurance, identity stability, and self-destructive tendency. Final verdict and overall stability, Frank Martin. Emotional endurance under devastations, John Wick. And if we define mental strength as ability to stay stable, strategics, and psychologically intact long term, Frank wins. And if we define it as ability to survive unbearable grief and keep moving. And then Vic wins. And just wait for a couple of seconds. I'm just drinking a water and deep psychological insights. Frank is mentally structured and Vic is mentally intense. Frank survives by controls and Vic survives by willpower. Both are strong but in different dimensions. If you want next, we can explore this Frank's hidden PTSD signs and is Vic psychologically addicted to violence? And so let's done it. Okay. Here was for the today's video. If you are loved this, then like our video, subscribe our channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon. And I hope you are loved it. Let's meet in the next video, and thanks for watching. Goodbye everyone.